This is the
Five Stars
podcast.
Let me talk to you.
Hi.
So, what do you guys want to talk about? Tell me when I'm telling lies.
Thanks, guys. Back to you.
Well, we got a lot on the docket to cover today. This one's going to get broken up into two recording sessions. I'll do one now, and hopefully as soon as I get back from Mass, I'll be able to knock out the Raw report and maybe still have time to watch WCW before I crash and burn due to sleep deprivation. I do it for all my loyal subscribers. Trying to bring you classic wrestling coverage here on the Five Starr Wrestling Report. The wrestling podcast nobody knows but everyone needs. It's the Monday show, even though it's pre-recorded the day before, at the butt crack of dawn. Actually, it's not even dawn, it's 7:45. But the Monday show entails our WWF retro coverage as we move along through our journey of reliving the entire WWF archive, or at least the flagship program and the pay-per-views. It's been quite the roller coaster ride these last few years of me going back and mostly being stunned at how much I've forgotten about. Even the feuds that I thought I knew like the back of my hand. There is so much detail that I've either wiped from memory or just plain forgot existed. It's probably more so a result of me getting older and growing more and more senile. Over time, everything starts to blend together after you've seen so much wrestling. But that's why you're all joining me, so we can relive it together. Make sure that you subscribe to the channel if you have not already. Come back to see the FSWR show on Mondays and Fridays on YouTube and Rumble. We are on both platforms. As I said, it's a packed show here because of the pay-per-view recap, so let's go ahead and kick things off with part one of the report. It's hard to believe we're already on the 11th one of these. WWF in Your House, Buried Alive. The pay-per-view with a very fitting tagline. I'm sure a lot of us wanted the show to be buried alive. I did by the time it was over. This one took place from the Market Square Arena in Indianapolis. A barn burner, 9,649 people in attendance. It's so strange going back almost 30 years and just seeing how close this company was to folding. The newer fans growing up watching the WWE today, can you imagine the look on their face if you told them at one point they were barely drawing 9,000 people to a pay-per-view event? I don't even think they could process something like that. I know the WWE is a different animal today, so you can't really compare apples and oranges like that. But holy cow, they couldn't even get 10,000 people in the door to see this thing. They all said, nah, we're good, dog. We'll keep tabs with what WCW is doing instead. Because at least that show's cool. Can't blame them. I was among that pack. Yeah, I was still watching the WWF product, but WCW was the place to be. at least during this time. So as we open things up here, we had a couple last-minute card changes. At no point do I remember them advertising an Intercontinental title match or a Stone Cold Steve Austin Savio Vega match. But apparently those were supposed to happen. One of them was kayfabe. They did some kind of injury angle on the kickoff where Ahmed Johnson beat up Farouk. And so they had to substitute him for Goldust in the IC title match later on. The other one, I consider this a blessing in disguise. Instead of subjecting us to the 9 billionth Austin Savio singles match, we instead got Austin versus Triple H. That is how sick I am of the Austin Savio feud. The fact that I'm advocating to see him wrestle Hunter instead must be a cold day in hell. I liked how Austin couldn't even call him by his full name during his interview. He called him Hunter Hearst. Even Austin recognizes how idiotic it is to say the entire name out loud. So we actually had a cool little historical tidbit here. This pay-per-view event marked the official date that they debuted Austin's glass-shattering rattlesnake theme. So for anybody curious, when did they actually start using that music for Austin's ring entrance? Well, here you go. October 20th, 1996. WWF In Your House, Buried Alive. And it became such a growing, popular song, they never changed it. This is the official Stone Cold theme for give or take the next 30 years on and off. And it still gets a pop. If they played Austin's theme at some point in 2026, and he made some surprise appearance on a TV show or even a live event, oh, you know the people would go ballistic. They wouldn't even have to hear the downbeat of the song. Just play the glass shatter. Everybody knows who it is. So we had kind of an odd dynamic in this match. It's heel versus heel. And at this stage, they weren't even close to trying to present Austin as a middle ground personality. Or a tweener, as all the goofballs try to use this terminology today. And because Hunter is still feuding with Mr. Perfect, that's who the crowd wound up getting behind in this match. If you really want to split hairs and argue semantics, yeah, Austin could be perceived as more of the babyface here. I think by the end, he won the people over just by working the charm of being stone cold. Meaning, I'm going to act like an asshole, and everyone will love me as a result. Babyface heel dichotomy aside, the wrestling overall was fine, but the commentary made so much of it incredibly distracting. They're doing this dumbass storyline with JR getting fucked around at the announce table. They were doing this all throughout the course of the first couple matches, like messing with his headset, screwing with his audio equipment. And the whole idea was to give people the impression that the company was doing this to get back at Jim for going into business for himself. Cutting that work shoot promo on the company a few weeks ago. It's so fucking dumb. The thing is, JR had some of the best commentary in the whole match. There was a point where Lawler tried to insinuate the reason JR hated Hunter is because he had long hair. To which Jim responded with, well, he definitely needs a haircut. Yeah. Give that one about 20 years, Jim. When he finally becomes the CCO of the fucking company, you'll get your wish. I am still flabbergasted by the idea that this guy wound up getting the keys to the castle. It pays to be boinking the boss's daughter, I grant you. But Jesus Christ. Who to predict that shit in 1996? Unheard of. So like I said, they're doing some okay back and forth wrestling. There's really not any heat because they're both heels. Finally, they do a double down spot. And immediately on cue, here comes Mr. Perfect to try to once again steal Triple H's eye candy. You'd have thought by now even a retard would have the wherewithal to try and plan ahead, considering the amount of times Mr. Perfect has walked off with Hunter's girl. In fact, I now just realized this. They just did an angle on Raw the other week where Hunter handcuffed his girl to the ring post, and she still wound up walking away with Hennig. At that point, wouldn't you just say, maybe I'll keep her in the locker room? So here comes Perfect. And this is where things turned into a giant overbooked cluster. In succession, here are the series of events that took place. Mr. Perfect grabs Hunter's girl. Stone Cold bumps into Perfect on the floor. Perfect and Stone Cold get into a heated argument. Perfect pulls Austin off the ring apron by his trunks. Austin throws a cup of water in Perfect's face. This is where I wrote, tell me why the match tomorrow on Raw is supposed to be Perfect versus Triple H, when they are doing everything in their power to promote the exact opposite of that fucking match. Did you want to see Triple H versus Mr. Perfect after seeing what they did here? I didn't. I wanted to see Perfect in Austin. But just when you thought things couldn't get any more Russo-rific, after Mr. Perfect leaves with Hunter's girl, after Triple H chases him up the aisleway, after he and Austin continue to fight on the floor for several more minutes, after they get back in the ring to do even more stuff, finally Austin goes to charge Triple H. Hunter moves, but Austin just bounces off the ropes by his knees and flips the bird to everybody. This is where they all immediately turn in his favor, by the way, because they all saw Austin do something really cool. And then Austin just grabbed Hunter and gave him the stunner for the pin. So, what the hell was the point of them doing any of that shit with Mr. Perfect? He literally played no part in the finish to this match. It was just a random angle thrown into it for no reason. You can't even say he caused Hunter to lose. Hunter lost because Austin outsmarted him, hit his finish, and won. So 24 hours before he's supposed to wrestle Mr. Perfect on television, he's doing a clean job on pay-per-view to a guy he wasn't even supposed to be wrestling originally in the first place. Oh, and considering everything that happens on Raw the following night, it makes all of this seem even less logical, if you can believe that. Wonderful. Can you take a wild guess as to who might have had some insight with booking this giant mess? Take your time. I'm sure it'll require a lot of thought. Speaking of giant overbooked clusterfuck storylines, the next match on the card featured the Smoking Guns versus Owen and Davey for the tag titles. Yet another heel versus heel scenario. That's what I prefer on my wrestling shows. Let's make everything 50 shades of gray and not be able to distinguish who the good guys and bad guys are. Another one of Russo's favorite gimmicks. We all know the story with Billy and Bart Gunn. I'm not going to spend 15 minutes trying to relay the timeline. Sunny left Billy and Bart last month after they lost the tag straps. She said she'll take them back if they can win the belts again. But Billy's more interested in fucking Sunny. And Bart just wants to win the tag titles. Because he doesn't get laid. The only thing we're missing is the Russo swerve where we come to find out that Bart's actually gay. And he secretly wants to bang Billy. I wouldn't have put it past them. Considering Russo's track record, his Jerry Springer crash TV mentality, it wouldn't have been the dumbest thing he's ever booked. The highlight of this thing outside Owens wrestling was the split screen with Sunny. I mean, they should have just done the entire match on a split screen so I could at least have something good to look at. Instead, we got a boring tag match for 9 minutes with one of the most hysterically bad finishes I've seen in recent memory. It was so amazingly bad, I had to go back and rewatch it like 5 times in a row. It was that comical. So the Guns have Owen in position for the Sidewinder, but in the process of Bart holding Owen in a sidewalk slam position, there are 2 things that go horribly wrong. Number 1, Davey Boy is supposed to come in and pull Bart out of the way, which ends up not going according to plan because of the second issue. Number 2, Billy cannot get his balance on the top rope to save his life. He's trying to go for this leg drop. He cannot stabilize himself. And it is so poorly mistimed. There are like 5 or 6 people in the front row heckling Billy over this. So Billy points him out and tells him to shut the fuck up, which I laughed at. But here's what made Davey look like such a tool. He knows he's supposed to pull Bart out of the way, but because Billy's taken an hour to do this leg drop because he can't get his balance situated, instead of Davey just waiting behind Bart patiently, he gets into the ring, and you see him grab Bart by his belt. And it's not a light hold. He is death gripping Bart's belt. And he's just holding on to it forever. To the point where you know that Bart realizes he's being tugged on. And he's just completely oblivious. Just standing there holding Owen. Finally, Billy gets his shit together. They kind of pulled the spot off. Looked horrible in execution. Everyone just basically fell down in a heap. Then Davey and Bart quietly roll out of the ring so Owen can hit Billy with a spin kick and pin him. It's one of those iconic bad finishes that you have to see to believe. Davey did not give a shit. He knew Billy was struggling, but he had a spot to do, damn it. I am being paid to pull this man down by his belt. And if Billy can't balance himself on the top rope, that's his fault. Epic. Just an epic train wreck finish. And it's very befitting of the Smoking Guns, ain't it? The worst fucking tag team of the 90s. God bless Billy Gunn, man. I got nothing against him. He was horrible in the mid-90s. But it's like a light switch came on. As soon as he became Road Dogg's tag partner, he turned his entire career around. All he had to do was ditch Bart. Imagine that. So before we get to the Intercontinental title match, we had a brief JR promo where he called out Vince McMahon again for trying to ruin his personal life. He also promoted the Bret Hart segment for the following night on Raw, which we'll cover when we get to the review. You know what the Jim Ross heel turn is reminding me of? Now that I've kind of lived through both periods and have something to compare it to, it reminds me so much of the botched Cena heel turn from earlier this year. Just nothing but wasted opportunity. It's like, if you're actually going to go there, don't half-ass it. Like, everything about the Jim Ross heel turn in 96 was so paper thin. I still can't figure out what the end goal was supposed to be. Had there actually been some sort of payoff to all this? What were they aiming to gain? It's not like the people had a reason to hate JR in the first place. He was the best fucking commentator they had. Sure, we got a bunch of witty lines. But what were they actually building to? Him and Vince in a Mexican standoff? Again, just waste of time. This company was getting destroyed by their opposition, both financially and in the ratings. And these numbskulls are trying to dabble in a story where one of their lead commentators is trying to stir up shit on TV. This is something WCW would have done during its dying years. And it wouldn't have drawn money then either. On the topic of things that didn't draw, Mark Merrow versus Goldust for the IC title. Not a single extra ticket was sold for this impromptu title match. At least we finally got a match where we could somewhat distinguish the babyface and heel. Although in Merrow's case, he's one of the most unlikable babyfaces on the roster. Still not over with the people. I think Lawler had the burn of the night on commentary. And this one made me jolly because it was directed right at Sable. I'm paraphrasing, but it was something to the extent of, apparently when Sable got her lip injections, she looked like Mick Jagger after a bar fight. Fucking brilliant. God. If Lawler was saying that about Sable in 1996, whew. Should have seen her face by 98. She would have made a great Halloween decoration. So we're chugging along in the action here. For the most part, there's nothing hideous happening on my screen, except for the two fat guys in the front row that were obsessed with touching all the talent. That's all they kept doing. All throughout the show. Didn't matter, babyface or heel, man or woman. They just kept touching and patting everybody on the back or arm as they were passing in front of them in ringside. First of all, I have no clue where the fuck security was. But this is kind of a thing we used to see all the time before they really beefed up security for these live events. Fans were always trying to touch the stars. It's like a sign of royalty or something. if you touched or patted down one of the talents, that meant you were badass. No, pretty sure that just makes you plain creepy. Creepier than Goldust cutting a promo mid-match threatening to rape all the fans in attendance. Not making that up, by the way. He actually threatened to do that. He said, "I will stick my tongue down all your throats." That's a lot of throat tonguing. I personally wouldn't want to touch any of these people with a 10-foot pole, but that's just me. I'm not Goldust. So eventually Hunter comes down to confront Mr. Perfect. I believe it was the first time we actually saw Hunter on camera with his hair down, not in some kind of ponytail. And it was wet too, so, I mean, he legitimately looked like Triple H. Not the goofy blue blood he was at the time. So, I kind of spaced out for a minute. All I know is Mr. Perfect slapped Goldust, and then Mero capitalized and hit a shooting star press for the pin. And again, you're supposed to think that Mero and Perfect are working in unison together, even though the whole thing's a giant ruse. That's why everything about the babyface run seems off. Oh, one thing I failed to mention about Goldust filling in as a last-minute replacement for Ron Simmons. I'm like 90% sure they ditched the Gladiator gimmick after this pay-per-view. And we'll obviously see him return later on as the leader of the nation. Which is far and away better than the Gladiator shtick. Shocking to hear, I know. So that took us to Vader versus Psycho Sid. It is a number one contenders match to determine who faces Shawn for the title at Survivor Series. There's been many moons going over the timeline of the Shawn Michaels Vader feuds in SummerSlam. Up until about 2 weeks ago, I was almost certain they had it in the works to go with Shawn and Vader at Survivor Series in the rematch. But the minute they made Sid and Vader a number one contenders match and started throwing a monkey wrench in with Sid and Shawn arguing on TV, I mean, that was where you immediately saw the shift. Mainly Shawn getting in Vince's ear and forcing him to shift plans. So I remember like virtually nothing about this particular match. I obviously know who went over because I know what the match is in November at Survivor Series. But I haven't seen this match in almost 30 years. It is precisely what I pictured a Vader-Sid singles match on pay-per-view to be. Meaning that it was two lumbering big dudes hitting each other for a while. It was very sloppy at certain points, especially when both guys weren't communicating spots. Sid did very minimal selling, even when Vader had the heat on him. Oh yeah, Shawn came out to do commentary too, but I tried to tune most of that out. There was a very impressive spot where Vader caught Sid coming off the top of the crossbody. It's not even the fact that Vader caught Sid in a power slam position. It's the fact that it looked so effortless. Just casually catching a 320-pound freak of nature like that. Yes, I know Vader was closing in on 400. It's not like he was a cruiserweight. But still impressive nonetheless. And they eventually get to all the smoke and mirrors stuff at the end with Cornette. Sid had Vader set up for a powerbomb, but ended up kicking the middle rope into Cornette's balls. Funny visual as Cornette's kicking his feet in the air selling. Meanwhile, Vader and Sid are doing shoot-off spots into the ropes while Cornette's selling like a cartoon villain. And eventually Vader tries for a power bomb, but can't get Sid up. So then he just plainly grabs Sid and calls chokeslam as loud as humanly possible right into the hard cam. Again, just totally not giving a shit. And then Sid hit the chokeslam and got the 3. I didn't write the time down, but if this match went any more than 8 minutes, I'd be shocked. Not that I needed to see the match go any longer, I didn't. It was all a formality. Everyone knew Sid was going over here. By this point, the Vader experiment was practically done. Who am I kidding? It was done after SummerSlam. Vince never toyed with the idea of Vader as a main eventer from this point forward. You know, all things considered, as lame as the actual match was, we did get a suitable payoff afterward. And no, I'm not talking about Sid winning the title in MSG. I'm talking about this epically botched promo he cut minutes afterward. Completely winded. Completely losing his train of thought. JR's asking if Sid will do anything to become WWF champion. To which Sid responded by looking at the camera and in epic Sid fashion going, "Yes, I will do anything I have to do in my destiny and make my conquer to prove that I'm the man, the master, and the ruler of the world." Never change, Sid. God rest his soul. What a fucking legend. He learned his lesson too. He couldn't ask Jim to retape it. Because you know what JR would have said? "Nah, Sid, we've been here before. We're live, pal." What made the whole thing so hilarious, I still have no clue what Sid was trying to say. But that was the genius of Psycho Sid, man. You had no idea what the hell he was going to say, but you knew it was going to be legendary. And so that leads us to our main event, what the show is primarily renowned for. It's what the entire pay-per-view was taglined after. The buried alive match between The Undertaker and Mankind. A cinematic sports entertainment extravaganza. It's probably the most descriptive way I can summarize it. If you enjoy yourself some old-fashioned WWF-style sports entertainment production, boy, do I have a match for you. Especially those closing 10 minutes. One thing I forgot about this going in, it was also the very first unsanctioned match in the WWF. A little different from a lights out match, I guess, but along the same vein. So when you review a gimmick match like this, you have to consider the parties involved, as well as the time period we're dealing with. Watching all of this in 2025, knowing that the illusion of kayfabe is forever dead, and that we can't undo so much of what's been exposed about the business, you do have to account for suspension of disbelief in more ways than one. The 9-year-old version of me seeing this is a lot different than the 30-plus-year-old version of me watching it. Like the Boiler Room Brawl was already pushing the bounds of reality versus fake. The idea that you book a gimmick match where the sole objective is to bury your opponent alive and cover his entire body with dirt. Little hard to buy unless you go in expecting somebody's career to end. I mean, not just their career, but their fucking life. Now, see, I can overlook a lot of that. As crazy as that might all sound, the one thing I cannot overlook, it's the idea that knowing your objective is to throw your opponent into an open grave and cover his entire body with dirt, rather than do that, you have multiple pockets of this match where both guys are fighting away from the gravesite and heading back toward the ring. You know, so they can do more moves. See, that's the part where they lost me in this match. I can do grave sites and dirt mounds and thunder and lightning and all that hot garbage. But when you decide to take your opponent away from the only location in the match where you can win, so you can drag them back to ringside to do more wrestling spots, that is where suspension of disbelief goes away. I actually felt bad for Taker here too, because he was really brutalizing himself to get this thing over. He was doing spots with Mankind here that I don't ever remember seeing Taker do with any previous opponent. And I'm strictly talking prior to 1996. He's out there doing suicide topes and cross body dives out to the floor. I'm like, dude, save the big shit for WrestleMania. It's not to say Mankind was only working halfway out there either, because he was taking a beating too. Putting himself through a lot of miserable looking pain. Getting backdropped into the ring steps. Taking a leg drop with a chair wrapped over his face. Getting catapulted headfirst into the guardrail. I know I shouldn't be shocked. It's Mick fucking Foley. I mean, this is the same guy we're going to see get tossed off a cell in about 2 years' time. But I have to credit these two for really going out there and trying to make this look like a legit fight. Even if the hokey gimmick was sort of working against them. It's odd because I remember nearly everything about the closing sequence to this thing. And I knew going in that Taker won the initial match. But because I still remember that classic visual of Taker reaching up to the dirt mound right before the pay-per-view feed cut, I still have these occasional brain farts where I'm thinking, no, Foley went over in this match, didn't he? But no, he didn't. Taker won. That's how inconsequential it was who actually won the match. But you get the shot where Taker gives Mankind the tombstone. And as he picks him up and carries him over toward the gravesite, they do a teaser where Mankind tries to raise the urn over his head to smash Taker into the grave. But then Taker reaches up and goozles Foley and chokeslams him into the pit. That's when Taker starts shoveling the dirt in so Hebner can ring the bell to declare Taker the winner. It's actually really good camera work on their part too, because we can still see Mankind's legs as Taker keeps shoveling in more dirt. But it's not a dummy or anything. It's still Foley. They're just making sure not to show the fact that he's keeping his head up so he can still breathe. Now, when it comes to all the folderol with what happened post-match, it really is a bittersweet thing because for every positive critique you can make about it, there's also a negative criticism that kind of weighs it down. Let's address the pink elephant in the room. The debut of Terry Gordy as the Executioner. They didn't officially recognize him here, but that's who it was. And if you've seen the Dark Side of the Ring series, they covered this part of Gordy's career pretty extensively. He was already winding down his career as it was. I can't remember the particulars of when, but I do know that Gordy suffered a really severe stroke before he came to the WWF. And he had a lot of complications as a result of it, to the point where it actually caused brain damage. And by the time he signed with the WWF, he was a shell of the peak Terry Gordy we saw in places like Dallas. Physically, he deteriorated. Mentally, he wasn't all there. It was just really sad to see. Like, never mind the whole stupidity of the gimmick. That goes without saying. I don't even think prime Terry Gordy would have been able to make that gimmick work. And as far as the whole heat angle with the locker room heels coming out and helping to bury Taker in the gravesite, I mean, the entire time I'm watching this, I'm having flashbacks to Rumble 94, when the entire fucking heel locker room came out to help Yokozuna throw Taker into the casket. It was almost a carbon copy repeat here, except the match was already over by this point. But you got all the heels out there mindlessly helping Mankind, Paul Bearer, and Gordy. And they're just shoveling dirt onto this grave mound for what turned out to be a good 5 minutes. They just kept shoveling and shoveling and shoveling. And they eventually top off the dirt mound completely. By then, you knew Taker had already escaped through the trap door. And as the heels are sticking the shovels in the mound, planting their flag, so to speak, well, that's when they start doing all the hocus pocus BS with the lighting and thunder effects. And, well, eventually the heels all cower and run away because they're all afraid of thunder, I guess. Then we get the epically amazing camera shot where Mankind, Paul, and Gordy walk away. And as they zoom the camera in on the tombstone, a big bolt of lightning strikes. And you see Taker reach his arm up through the dirt mound as Vince McMahon channels his inner Frankenstein by going, "Look, he's alive! He's alive!" Again, hokey, silly, 100% WWF cartoon entertainment. I mean, here's the thing. I did not hate this match. Even going back and watching it again as an adult, it was a very well-worked professional wrestling match. It's what made the Undertaker-Mankind feud so memorable and so great. The fact that they always worked well together despite sometimes these goofy stipulations being thrown in their way. And I've been on record saying that I enjoyed this match way more than the Boiler Room match. I still maintain that. So even though hypothetically I probably should hate everything this match represented, in good faith, I can't do that because the work was still really solid here. If the match sucked, it would have been an entirely different story. The thing I find funny is that this is all building to another match between these two at Survivor Series in a month where Paul Bearer gets suspended above the ring in a shark cage. And I don't remember a fucking thing about that match. I just find it amusing that they go from Boiler Room Brawl to buried alive to a regular singles match where the fat heel manager gets suspended above the ring in a cage. Never mind that Taker's just back wrestling a month after getting smothered with dirt. He's dead. He'll just walk it off. We are entering the glory period, folks. There's a lot of stupidity yet to come. A lot of nonsensical stuff. Things that you'll just kind of have to take with a grain of salt. Because there will be no logical explanation. Say what you want about the pay-per-view, but the Buried Alive match definitely lived up to the hype. It helped to save what would have otherwise been a pretty lousy, mediocre in-your-house special. And there have been some real stinkers we've reviewed. Hell, the gimmick did so well, the WWF ended up duplicating that same match like 10 to 15 more times throughout the course of the Attitude Era. With the guys that weren't even feuding with Taker at certain points. They just really loved the Buried Alive stipulation and said, let's keep beating that horse to death. I'm not saying it was smart, but it was a thing that happened. So here we are, 24 hours after the pay-per-view. And I'm telling you, man, Vince is getting desperate. He knows they're getting slaughtered by Nitro. So he's trying to pull out every desperate ploy imaginable for a ratings grab. Even if that includes deliberately false advertising a match for a returning legend who hasn't wrestled in well over 3 years. Now, of course, did them promoting Bret Hart and Mr. Perfect for Raw help to bring back viewership numbers? Well, here's the thing. They actually got a bit of a ratings bump compared to the number they did on the pitiful Go Home show the other week. A whopping 1.8. Here they at least did a 2.6. And Nitro did a 3.2. So I guess in theory, if you really want to argue it, yes, the advertising of Bret Hart's return and Mr. Perfect's return to the ring was helpful, but it was still only a 1-week blimp on the radar, because the numbers quickly sagged back down into the low 2s afterward. And by the way, it's not like Nitro dished out a classic banger on the other station this week. The only thing that made that show memorable is that it marked the first appearance of Crow Sting after he had walked out of the company post-Fall Brawl. Elsewise, they had a show with outstanding squash matches such as Dean Malenko versus Jimmy Graffiti, DDP versus Sergeant Craig Pittman, Jeff Jarrett versus Ron Studd, Lex Luger versus Roadblock. Yes, that was an actual job guy they used from the Power Plant in 1996. Harlem Heat versus the American Males. Good God. The Faces of Fear versus the Fantastics. In 1996. Fucking Bobby Fulton and Tommy Rogers were still wrestling by that point. And of course, we can't forget that instant classic main event of Mr. JL versus the NWO Sting. Yes, that is what was still by and large skewering Monday Night Raw here in the fall of '96. The only thing on that show outside the Sting appearance that I might have wanted to see, apparently there was a Chris Jericho-Bobby Eaton singles match. Other than that, show looked like a steaming hot turd. Complete waste of 2 hours. But they still beat Raw. And that is quite disturbing. Now, did the WWF help matters any by opening the show with Psycho Sid versus Owen Hart? Well, no. That definitely did not entice people to want to stick around. And that's not a knock on either guy. Big fan of Owen Hart. Always was growing up. We all know what I think of Sid. A true treasure that man was. For good and bad. But everyone knew exactly what this was going to be before the bell even rang. Frankly, I was shocked that they actually went with the DQ finish instead of having Sid outright pin Owen clean. But the whole thing was total autopilot mode for both guys. Sid wasn't even trying here. I mean, he did less selling here than he did in the match with Vader the previous night. I think the biggest bump he took here was a spot where he got clotheslined out to the floor. And even then, he basically just fell on his ass and rolled to his back. I don't know what he was thinking. Maybe he was trying to rationalize it like, I have to wrestle on pay-per-view in 4 weeks for the WWF title. I'm not doing anything to risk injuring myself. Especially knowing that I'm supposed to win the title. But all it did was give Owen the incentive to go out there and work at 25% effort. I mean, he was just going through the motions out there. He got some heat on Sid after Bulldog came down to run a distraction. Worked over Sid's left knee for a while. Ironically, the same left knee that I'm pretty sure Sid broke several years later doing that asinine jump off the middle rope on a WCW pay-per-view. Snapped it right off the fucking bone. And this was such a remarkably stupid finish. Davey is supposed to run in to take out Sid for the DQ. Sid has Owen in position for a powerbomb with his back turned to Davey. So rather than Davey just come in to club Sid from behind, he has to run past Sid toward the opposite end of the ring so he can then clothesline Sid from the front. In other words, I could be conspicuous and try to attack the guy from behind like a clever heel would do. But no, instead, I'll just let him know that I'm coming by setting up a spot that takes twice as long to execute. So that is now 2 consecutive spots with the Bulldog where he's left looking like a complete numbskull. Then, of course, you had Shawn Michaels run out to save Sid as Owen and Davey were beating him down. Great moment where Shawn tried to slide into the ring under the ropes. But as he came up, he ended up losing his balance because he was wearing what were basically dress shoes with no traction. So he came up looking like a deer on ice skates. And they're still doing the whole bickering thing between him and Sid where Sid keeps claiming that he doesn't need Shawn's help to fight his battles, but Shawn's insisting that he's just trying to watch his back. Because, you know, they're good friends now, despite the fact that they were feuding at one point, because Sid kind of left Shawn for dead after WrestleMania. Yeah, we're just glossing over that little detail. None of this, by the way, is helping Shawn to stay over with the fans. The ones especially that are growing tired of the act. But that was where they left things in the WWF title program ahead of Survivor Series. A babyface title match with no heat. Yeah, that'll sell tickets in a hurry. By the way, 2 things I wanted to mention before we move on. Number 1, in addition to Bret Hart's return and Mr. Perfect's quote-unquote in-ring return, We also had the return of Vince McMahon to the play-by-play position. I forgot how little I actually missed him until I started hearing him talking again. Also, completely unrelated, but I had to ask, there was a sign all throughout the show that I was incredibly distracted by, and I was trying to screen cap it, but I couldn't make out the full text. I'm like 80% sure somebody brought a sign to the show that read something to the effect of, "Hump my face, gold dust." Now, it is entirely possible I'm misreading that. But if it did in fact read those words, of all signs to make, you had a giant blank poster board at your disposal. Could have come up with any phrase or quote to come to the venue with. This person voluntarily wanted one of the wrestlers to hump his face. I understand we all have kinks. I'm not judging. But sometimes those kinks are best left undisclosed. You don't always need to broadcast everything publicly. See, TikTok is a prime example. Speaking of things that didn't need to be broadcasted, the Smoking Guns wrestled the Hog Farmers. They came out this week, the Hog Farmers did, with baby piglets, one of which I believe legitimately peed on Lawler's lap. There's more of that asinine bathroom humor to make Vince happy. I got angry here because JR had the gall to let us know on commentary the team that won this match would be considered next in title contention. To which I asked, did I not just see the Smoking Guns lose clean to the champions on pay-per-view less than 24 hours prior? You're telling me they're still being considered for title contention? That all they had to do was beat the Hog Farmers here? Thankfully, sanity prevailed, and the Guns lost. They did another miscue angle where Bart knocked Billy off the apron. Then Henry Godwin hit Bart with a slop drop and got the pin. For the record, I am not condoning the Hog Farmers getting a tag title shot against Davey and Owen, but they really are the lesser of two evils at this point. At least in that scenario, we have a definitive babyface and heel tag team. The only other thing I noted about this segment was Vince's comment right as he was pitching to the Hall of Fame promo. He said, point blank, at the rate they're going, Billy and Bart will never make it into the WWF Hall of Fame. Gee, you think, Vince? Who'd have ever guessed that the Smoking Guns weren't qualified to be in the Hall of Fame class? At least you heard it from the owner of the company. Oh, in case you were curious too, the WWF Hall of Fame class for 1996, 3 inductees, Pat Patterson, Jimmy Snuka, and Vince Sr. The Snuka one didn't age well, did it? So at this point in the show, here's where we had the return of Bret Hart. Hard to believe it's been well over 6 months since we've actually seen Bret on WWF television. Outside a couple pre-tapes here and there. But here he was, live and in living color. And I gotta say, I've been openly critical about many aspects of Bret's career over the past few years, going back and doing these retro deep dives. He was certainly never one of my favorites growing up. But seeing the miserable state of this fucking product in his absence, with you-know-who being at the helm with the top championship, let's just say it was good to see him back. It's like the old phrase, you never know how good something is until it's gone. And that good's been missing for the better part of half a year. And here's the thing when it comes to Bret. You will never hear me objectively state that Bret Hart was this dynamic, super captivating promo. But the one thing I have been on record saying, and I still maintain it after hearing this promo, Bret did have a way of communicating a message to the audience in a manner that seemed authentic and genuine. He wasn't being an over-the-top personality or a parody of what a wrestling promo might sound like. He was just Bret Hart, speaking to people as himself, like in the exact way you'd imagine hearing him talk around the dinner table or even just casually amongst his peers in the back. And I always appreciated that when it came to Bret. He never tried to be somebody he wasn't. Even when wrestling in many ways is supposed to be guys being these extroverted extensions of their own personalities, and especially during a cartoon era like what we were dealing with in the mid to late 90s, Bret could never pretend to be like that. And the great thing is that he never had to be. Yes, his delivery was a lot of the times dry and mundane. He didn't talk people into the seats like a Rock or an Austin or a Foley did. But he still had the ability to get the people to care and listen to what he was saying. And he covered a lot of ground here. I mean, he's been gone for the better part of 6 months. So as you might imagine, he had a lot to get off his chest. First, he addressed something that I don't even think I've really discussed at great length. Something that was more insider at the time, but people had obviously been talking about it on dirt sheets. And that was the whole topic of Bischoff trying to offer Bret a lucrative deal to jump ship to WCW during his absence. And there have been a lot of rumors over the years regarding the circumstances of what went down during those negotiations. I'm not really here to debate the logistics of every detail. I mean, we could spend an hour trying to break down what did and didn't happen during those conversations. What we do know is that, yes, it is confirmed, there were extensive offers being presented by both Vince and Eric during this time. So anyone that ever tries to tell you, the WCW contract offer in '96 never happened, that's completely bogus. Yes, Bischoff was trying to recruit Bret. I can't confirm whether or not Bischoff himself has tried to quash this idea on his podcast. If he's claimed that those '96 negotiations never happened, he's lying. Straight up. And I like Bischoff, so I'm not trying to stir the pot. But yes, he was trying to bring Bret on board. I don't remember the details of the initial offer. I think it was somewhere in the ballpark between $7 and $9 million over 2 or 3 years. But you're going to hear different numbers based on the sources you go to. Now, we do know what Bret ended up signing for instead. And that was Vince's 20-year contract offer that, I mean, to this day, people are still fumbling over the numbers of how much Bret was supposed to actually make on that contract, had it actually been seen through all the way. Again, long-form discussion for a different date. So Bret went over that and said that he had a lot of soul searching to do. He had to figure out whether or not he even wanted to come back to wrestling because he's had all these other side projects going on. And his passion for wrestling did start to kind of dwindle by this period. I think that's well documented. He talked about the Iron Man match with Shawn and actually had some great quotes here as he was doing some of those underhanded sly Bret pot shots, saying that there's something about Shawn that he doesn't like, something that doesn't sit right with him. Yes, he's a great wrestler. He might even be a bit more popular and good-looking than Bret. And let me tell you something. There was a lot about this promo that stuck with me. The one thing that stands out above anything else, when Bret tried to claim that Shawn was more popular than him, that crowd response was deafening. They did not like hearing that. They just showered Shawn with boos. And you could even see the look on JR and Bret's face after the fact, like, oh boy. It's very telling. Yeah, again, not shocking. Shawn was not a very well-liked guy around this period. He said the two things Shawn will never have over him are toughness and wisdom. Ain't that the truth? Which brings him to Steve Austin Stone Cold. That was a direct quote, by the way. Kind of mixed up the lingo. Bret perceives Austin as the toughest man in the WWF right now. And that is why he's back to accept the challenge for Survivor Series. Which made Brian Pillman very happy. Austin not so much. There was a shot in the locker room where you see Pillman standing behind Austin, pumping his fists and going crazy over the idea of getting to see Austin versus Bret. Meanwhile, Austin just slowly turns over his shoulder to stare at Pillman like, the fuck are you so happy about? That part was great. And then Bret eventually wrapped up by saying that he's back and he'll be a WWF talent for life. Yeah, famous last words. We all know that was a blatant lie. Oh, and he also talked a little about the whole tragedy with his nephew during the time. That was a part of the promo where he talked about his motivation for wanting to come back in the first place. Like I said, there was a lot to cover here. And I've already spent way longer than I wanted to breaking everything down. It was not a blowaway segment. But I'll be damned if it wasn't one of the better Bret Hart promos I think I've ever heard. I remember bits and pieces of it going back and watching it again. Mainly the comments about Shawn, because I remember my brothers talking about a lot of the heat between those two during the Fallout, the Mania. Because they were reading some of this stuff on the internet when they had access to it. They knew what was going on. We just didn't really know the extent of how deep that jealousy and hatred went. But it was still a really well done segment. And again, everything Bret talked about here, you knew that he meant every word of it. Whether you were a Bret fan or not, the one thing he made abundantly clear by the end of the segment, he had a lot of unresolved issues with Shawn to deal with. And those issues are really going to be highlighted over the span of the next 12 months. When you really think about it, the build to Montreal began here. 1 calendar year before the big screwjob angle. It's almost as if it was one of the most well-crafted work shoots in the history of wrestling. More to come during my conversation when we get to the Montreal Screwjob. Before I dive deeper into that rabbit hole abyss, let's get to the main event. One of the biggest foul play moves on WWF's part we've seen all year. False advertising the in-ring return of Mr. Perfect, just to set up a TV main event with Mark Marrow. What a fucking rib. Now let's back up here because there's more to the story than what they actually revealed. So as Mr. Perfect is making his ring entrance, you see him hobbling down and showing signs of being attacked. So your presumption is that Hunter must have jumped him beforehand, which, well, that's correct, to a degree. Again, more to the story that hasn't been revealed. But there was an angle that they shot where Hunter attacked Perfect in the back and rammed a giant rolling cart into his leg. Now, one might think they would have bothered to show that on TV to let us know why Mr. Perfect was injured, rather than just telling us that he was attacked with a rolling cart. That part they failed to do. So with zero context, we see Mr. Perfect show up here unable to compete for mystery reasons. And then Gorilla Monsoon explains what happened to the audience with no visual representation. So we get the whole back and forth exchange where Perfect is trying to tell Marrow that he needs him to fill in for him. But then Hunter's explaining that he's under no obligation to wrestle Marrow because he signed a contract to wrestle Mr. Perfect. So long story short, after they deliberated the whole thing for like 3 minutes, Hunter agrees to wrestle Marrow if he puts up the IC title. It took way longer than necessary to actually get to the point, but that's what they wound up going with instead. And again, the reason behind them false advertising Mr. Perfect's return to the ring, it was a giant ruse that they unveiled by the end of the segment. All for a storyline that basically went nowhere, because by the time Survivor Series rolls around, Hennig's contract with the WWF ended, and instead of re-signing, he signed a contract to go work for WCW and be an honorary member of the New World Order, where he did jack shit for all of like 2 years and just standing in the background with Rick Rude and only took occasional bumps. But hey, he probably got paid more. So who are we to judge? And again, just for contextual purposes, all this fucking back and forth between Hunter and Perfect for weeks upon weeks upon weeks was in fact a giant waste of fucking time. So Hunter and Marrow had an incredibly boring match for 9 minutes. Mr. Perfect was on commentary doing everything to blatantly let the audience know that he was about to fuck over Marrow by the end of it, and that he and Hunter were in cahoots the whole time, without directly saying any of the quiet part out loud. Shock of all shocks, they do the ref bump. Hunter goes to grab a chair at ringside, and as he and Sable get into a tug of war over the chair, in runs Mr. Perfect to tease that he's going to whack Hunter with it. And in the most predictable swerve of all time, he instead levels Marrow over the head with it. Also, Hunter could then pick up Marrow's limp body and hit him with the pedigree to pin him, which I howled at. Even when Marrow was laid out unconscious with a fucking chair shot to the cranium, brain matter strewn all over God's creation. Yeah, Hunter still had to go over with his finish, just for reassurance. Get ready to see a lot of that over the next 10 plus years. And that was how the show went off air, with Triple H and Mr. Perfect revealing that they were in cahoots and that the whole thing was a ploy from the jump street. And I guess Mark Merrow was just collateral damage along the way, which I was okay with. Now, of course, this all begs the question, if the end goal was just to get the IC title on Hunter anyway, why did they need to do an 8-man tournament just to put the belt on Merrow in the first place? Couldn't they have just had Hunter win the fucking thing and not waste our time? What was the purpose of Mark Merrow's title reign? Other than to do this angle. Remember what I was talking about earlier about how there's a lot of illogical stuff coming up over the next however many years, where they just kind of throw logic and rationality to the wayside, expecting people not to ask questions? This is one of those situations. None of it was logical, which is precisely why they did it. Because we needed a swerve, bro. And again, all for like 3 weeks of seeing these two together on camera before Hennig leaves the company to go work for WCW. The Monday Night Wars, ladies and gents. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. A lot of shit happened. That's actually a pretty good summation of the Attitude Era right there. Lots of shit happened. And we will be judging how much of it was actually good. It was not a lot. But we're not going to do that now, because we're going to get out of here. Folks, thanks everybody that always comes back to check out the show every week. Just as a heads up, since we can plan ahead of time here for the Friday show, there will not be a world-class recap. Yes, there was a show. I'm just not going to have time to sit down to watch it. Because as of this current recording, I still need to watch WCW, and that is a full 2-hour show this week. So I need to give myself plenty of time to digest all that content. So we will have the NWA and the Mid-South review coming up this Friday. And then we will hopefully get back to normality over the next week or so. Oh, and don't forget, next week we also have the Halloween Havoc pay-per-view. So I have to set aside more time this weekend to watch more wrestling. Fun times ahead. But that'll be it for now. Take care, everybody, and have a good one. Peace out.